Hey guys, welcome to the start of the colouring section of DaVinci Resolve. Great job making it this far. I hope you've had a little bit of practice with the editing, getting a feel of it, and now you're ready to start the fun part, which is colouring. And that's probably why we're all here in the first place, jumping on board with DaVinci because of its awesome colouring features. Alright guys, so let's head on down to the colour wheel icon at the bottom here. And now we find ourselves in the colouring section. Let me introduce you to this platform. Here we have all the clips. If we want to jump from one to another, we can click. If we want a little bit more screen real estate, we can head up to here where it says clips, and it's gone. Below that we have the timeline, and to get rid of that we head up to here, hit timeline, and it's gone. And guys, let's pop back into the editor for a second. If you remember the adjustment layers, the annoying thing here, let's go to clips. You may think you're editing the color for a clip, but because this timeline is selecting the adjustment layer, you've gone and edited all the clips at the same time. So guys, you can disable it. Just click here. Now we've disabled that adjustment layer by clicking on V3, video 3, we've disabled it. So now we can do the individual clips. And guys, another critical use of the timeline is if you're editing speeches or ceremony footage and you've got multiple tracks, you might be frustrated in the coloring page that you're only seeing one track to color and you can't get access to the ones below. Even if you're clicking on them, they might not show up. And to do that, you have to click on the timeline, and once again, just click V3 to get rid of the third track and get access to the second track, and then V2 to get rid of the second track and get access to the track underneath. So guys, remember, if you've ever got an adjustment layer or multiple layers of video and you want to edit below that, you have to use this timeline tool. Otherwise, you can just close it down and get yourself that screen real estate for editing. Effects are here, nodes, and this is the gallery. The gallery is where we're going to store our color grades and node trees. We'll look more into this later. All right, and then we've got our zoom function here. So normally we put on fit, but if you need to zoom in, you can go here. If you press the middle mouse button, you can drag this around. So that could be useful if you want to go into 300 and drag, check out different parts of the image. You can also zoom in with the middle mouse wheel, which is quite useful, and then click to drag. All right. Don't forget we've got proxies here. Guys, we've got a couple of automatic functions here. We've got auto balance, doesn't seem to do the best job, and we've got auto white levels. So you just select, click on it, and then click where it is white on your image, and it should automatically balance your white levels. So sometimes that can be useful if your camera's auto white balance is a bit off. Here we've got temperature. We can go from yellow to blue. We can double click to reset. Tint, we've got magenta and green. Double click to reset. Contrast. Adds contrast to the image. Pivot adjusts where that contrast is, if it's in the more dark areas or the more light areas. And mid detail adds texture or can be used to soften the image. We can reset everything by hitting this button here. I'm going to press down to go to the next clip. And guys, let's zoom in a little bit. Obviously this bride has got great skin, but if you've got a more wrinkly bride, you can turn the detail down a little bit and it's just going to soften her up a little bit and it's going to remove. So you can go to like -30 can be nice. Obviously more texture might be good on a man, make him a little bit more rugged looking. But for a woman, maybe you can bring the detail down a little bit. Okay, let's go back to fit. All right guys, so here are our basic color wheels. Lift is the dark areas. So we can sometimes pull that down a little bit. You can also adjust the position of this. Let's maybe pull it over to blue. Okay, that's adjusting the shadows. This bar at the bottom is adjusting the exposure in the dark areas. So now I'm making the dark areas more dark or more light. This is the gamma, which is the sort of mid-tones. So we can maybe take it over to red a little bit, balance out the blue. Making a bit of a split tone, here we go. And gain, oh, let's have a look. We've also got the exposure here, so I can adjust the exposure in the mid-tones. And then finally the gain is the highlights. So I might want to put a little bit more red in the highlights, for instance. Maybe a bit of yellow. Maybe nothing. I can reset with this button. And again, we've got the exposure in the highlights. And guys, often it's a good idea to have proxies off when you're doing the coloring. Okay, so offset then does the whole image. So we're adjusting lift, gamma and gain all at once, and general exposure at the bottom. Now underneath the wheels we have color boost. Color boost is adding color and saturation mainly in areas that have less color. So it does act a bit like saturation, but let's double click that to get rid of it. It does target mostly the darker areas. Now shadows is adjusting the dark areas, the very dark areas. So we can add some more shadow there if we want. I think I was happy with it. Highlights again is just affecting mostly the most highlighted areas, the brightest areas. Saturation is the overall amount of color in the image. So we can take it all the way down to black and white, or we can make it super colorful. Hue changes the colors in the image. Not too much use most of the time for us, but if you do a very slight adjustment, you might be able to tweak something, but I don't really use hue much. And then Lumix Mix is adjusting the luma in the image. It hardly seems to do anything. I don't really notice much at all with that. Okay. Next to the color wheels, we have the curves. Now, the curve is my favorite way of adjusting exposure on an image. In the middle of the curve is the midtones, the bottom of the curve is the shadows, and the top of the curve is the highlights. I like to lift up the shadows a bit. and have a bit more gradient in the shadows, and then take the whites down a little bit. And that can be like a standard curve, but then obviously you're going to change it for each image. So for this one, let's have a look. Let's bring the shadows down a little bit. I want to keep the detail in the highlights. Okay. Okay. I may consider bringing the offset down a little bit here. Okay. And there we go. So that's the curve. And usually that's how I would do my exposure. You can also, once you've made your curve, you can also tweak it a little bit with these wheels. And guys, so yeah, it's really up to you. It's obviously a lot of fun doing this. If you have a look at these parade scope here, we can see at the bottom, this is how close I am to the absolute black at 0. So I'm a way off black at the moment, and I personally like to have the blacks raised a bit. But obviously if you want a more contrasty image, then you can pull that down and go more towards black. And look, the whites are way off white at the moment, so I could bring that way up, and that would be like maximum contrast sort of thing. And some people like that sort of style. If that's the sort of style you like, go for maximum contrast. I feel like having it a little bit crushed is a little bit more for me. I know in Hollywood, they say sometimes they like to raise the blacks and not have like the very darkest blacks and not have it very top of the whites. So it's a sort of more compressed image. And I quite like that style, but also when I see high contrast images on Instagram, I'm like, oh, that's really nice as well. So sometimes I change it around, and guys, it's super personal. Whatever you like with the exposing is what's best. Because guys, we've got to enjoy our jobs, haven't we? So yeah, make a few points on the curve, have a play with it. And then tweak it with these if you like. There we go. All right, guys, so that's lesson 1. It's just a very basic introduction. Have a little play with these features, have a play with the curve, have a little play with the lift, gamma and gain, try everything out, and we're going to jump into lesson 2 once you've had a little feel around with that. See you soon. Hey guys, welcome to lecture 2 on colouring. This one's going to be quite quick. I don't want to go into too much detail just yet because we're still new to this, but I'm going to give you a very brief introduction to nodes. And as the course progresses, I'm going to show you the different types of nodes and how they function together. Right, so for now, just head on over to the top right of the screen and you'll see it says nodes. We click nodes. And until this point, we've done all of our edits in one node. If I click on the node, we go back to how it looks without the node. Okay, so if we want to add a node, I suggest using the default keyboard shortcut, Alt-S. That adds one after the current node. We can also press Shift-S to add a node before. Or we could also add node, add serial via the keys. But guys, just get used to doing the shortcuts. Alt-S for one after, Shift-S for one before the current selection. And so we can do some more edits in this node. Maybe we can do some drastic color grade like this. And then there we go. So we've got one node, then another node. Okay guys, so that's a super basic introduction to nodes. As we move through the course and we add more functions and effects, we're going to build this node tree, and ultimately it may look a little bit like this towards the end. So we get like quite a complicated dynamic structure, and I'm going to explain more about that as we go through the course. So let's go back to where we were. All right, see you in the next video. Hey guys, so in this video we're going to talk a little bit more about color spaces and color space transform. We did have a quick look at this in the edit just to get our log footage looking like standard footage so we can then cut it down a bit more easily. But I'm going to explain a little bit more about this now, and we're going to understand how to use this properly when we're doing the coloring. All right, so let's have a look at this image now. Here we're looking at various different color spaces. We've got Rec 709 as a solid thin band, Rec 2020, P3, ACES, ARRI wide gamut, which is, one of the most powerful camera systems. And surrounding all of this, we've got DaVinci wide gamut as this big black triangle. So currently DaVinci wide gamut is containing the most amount of color information available out of any color space. So for that reason, when we're doing our editing, we like to work in DaVinci wide gamut. That means we've got access to the most colors possible before we export it into something like Rec 709, which is going to be more compressed. But by working in that larger color space, we're going to get a better final image. Okay guys, so now that we understand why we want to work in DaVinci wide gamut to make the best use of all that color power whilst we're making our color grades, I'm going to now show you how to implement that using nodes in the most powerful way possible. So I've deleted the nodes that we made before because we did apply one color space transform in the editing process, but I want to just remind you of how we did that and show you the new, more powerful way of doing it that we're going to use in the color page. So let's add a node. We might have to join these up. Zoom out. If you middle click, you can move the node tree working area around. So we've got our first node. Let's press Alt-S for another node. We can change the size there a bit. So right, we've got two nodes. And for the first node, let's start the color space transform. It's just here, color space transform. For input color space, I'm going to be using a Sony S-Gamma3.cine, and for my input gamma, I'm using S-Log3. That's because I'm shooting on the A7S III and the A7 IV. But guys, depending on your camera, you might need to use maybe C-Log3 or any other setting that you've chosen to film your wedding in. Output color space, we now want to bring that to DaVinci wide gamut. Output gamma, let's bring that to DaVinci intermediate. Okay, so that's our input change. Now this node is now changing the log footage to DaVinci wide gamut footage. And now we're taking to the node before the exit. Let's click on that. Bring in the color space transform. And now the input color space, can you guess what it is? It's DaVinci wide gamut. The input gamma is DaVinci intermediate. The output color space is now going to be Rec 709, and the output gamma, we use gamma 2.4. And guys, this is just like a standard output gamma for most displays. It's not got the same amount of color information as DaVinci gamut, but it's going to be more useful for most devices. So if you're not sure what to output, go for Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. That's kind of an industry standard. So now we have a color space transform. And guys, we just want to check that we're working in DaVinci Intermediate in our settings. So we can hit the settings here in the bottom right. Color management, color science. We've got DaVinci YRGB, that's great. Timeline color space, DaVinci wide gamut. Make sure we're here. Guys, make sure you're on DaVinci wide gamut in the timeline color space. Output color space, Rec 709 is fine. All right. Guys, there is another way of doing this called DaVinci YRGB color managed, but it's a bit more fiddly and I don't recommend that way, guys, because it will try and interpret your footage, and if it doesn't get it right, it's much more easy, in my opinion, to use this node structure so you can choose in your individual clip what that first input is. So guys, sometimes if you're not using your Sony camera, instead of changing everything around, you just have to change the first two. So we could put, for example, the DJI D-Log and DJI D-Gamut if we're flying a DJI drone or something else, another camera. All right, so let's go back to the Sony. There we go. All right, guys, so now we've got two nodes. Let's label them. Input color space transform. Output CST, okay. And we're going to leave these basically as in and out points. And any work we do now, we're going to work in between these. And all that work is going to make use of DaVinci wide gamut whilst we're processing. So let's select this and press Alt-S, get a few clips in the middle. And now we can start applying various effects and color changes to these, and it's all going to be worked in within this wide gamut. I hope that makes sense, guys. Just set that up for now. You don't have to put all of these nodes in, just put the input CST and the output CST. And guys, so if you're not using log, then maybe you don't need to bother making these input and output color space transforms. But I'm going to make a video about how to shoot in log, and really we should be. If you have the possibility to shoot in log, we really have to learn how to use that to make full use of the color spectrum that the camera can record and the dynamic range. So at the end of this course, I'm going to make a bonus lecture in shooting in log just to help you nail that on the wedding day. And it's going to be focused on doing it on the back of the camera and not with a screen, so you can have multiple cameras run around and not worry about having to have a large monitor. So guys, I'm going to help you through that. Thanks guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to this third lecture. Now we're going to look into a little bit more detail about some of the more advanced functionality of the color grading. And we're going to look at the hue and saturation curves, and we're going to use it to pop the skin out a little bit. So let's have a look at this. All right guys, so at the end of the last class, we put our input and output color space transforms, and we've left a few nodes in the middle here. Now we need to go ahead and put some exposure corrections here. And guys, when it comes to node order, I recommend having all of the exposure corrections at this first node. If you do it at the end, it doesn't work as well. And we're going to talk a little bit more about node order as we go through the course. But just remember for now, any sort of exposure changes, do that at the first node. So look, we've selected the first node after the input CST. And let's add a little bit of contrast by playing with this curve a little bit. So we put some nice contrast in there. Let's just fill this. So we might want to lift the blacks a little bit more to soften it up. We might want some more contrast, bringing it back down, totally up to you, how you feel. I'm quite happy here today with that. And that can be fine for my first bit of exposure correction. So let's rename that one, no label, primaries. And primaries is like your first little bit of color touching here, or exposure. We can also add some contrast hitting in primaries if we like. Maybe take out a little bit of any skin texture. Look, it's might go to -30 or maybe I'll go to -15. She's got great skin. So let's think, saturation's fine for me. Oh, maybe I'll take a little bit down. Highlights, shadows, color boost, no. Right, so now we want to look at another function. Let's hit here. And now we want to have a node. I'm going to call this one skin pop. And what we can do is basically take the skin tones and give them a little bit more of a pop by adding some maybe exposure and saturation. So I'm clicking on this next button here on the curves. And I can go across here and you see I've got a pipette. I can click on her skin and it's showing me where that is on the graph here. So this is hue versus hue. I can change the hue of her skin. I don't think I'm going to do anything with hue though. Let's have a look at hue versus saturation. I can click on her skin and then just add a little bit more saturation if I want. Let's add too much and then put it down. Just going to add a tiny little bit. Let's have a look at hue versus luminance. And let's add a little bit of luminance to the skin tones. Pull it way too much and then put it down. Add a little bit. And she's already sitting in some great light, so it's not super important here. Luminance versus saturation. I don't think we need to worry about that. Let's now pull up the clips and see. Right, so I'm going to click on this one. Now, if I middle click on what we just did, it's going to copy that grade across. Let's hit clips again. So let's disable the primaries. That looked quite good there. So the skin pop here. How's that looking? Let's select this lady's face. Seeing more effect on the actual wood. Okay. I'll look at the next clip. Copy that across. So let's see the effect of the skin pop. It's very subtle at the moment. There we go. There we go. Zoom in a little bit, 300%. So, turning it on and off. That's off, that's on. You see, it's just adding a little bit of a pop, a little bit of life, a little bit of color. It's a subtle effect, but guys, anything too much is going to put us in that sort of uncanny valley of not looking natural. So generally we try and keep these things quite subtle. So guys, using that same procedure, you can play with these hue versus sat and hue versus luminance for any other parts of the image. But for this skin pop node that we've made, it's just going to be focused on those skin tones. I can copy this, Control C, and paste everything else, press V. Now I've copied that node structure to all of these first clips. So we've got the skin pop in all of them. I can turn it on and off. You can hardly see it on her. Primaries, we can now change these. Let's go back to this button, which is the first curve, and we can tweak the exposure for each of these clips. Okay. Just like that. All right, guys, I hope that helps. I hope that's a useful introduction to the curves. I hope you can see how that can be quite useful. I hope that's a useful introduction to the curves. There is one other part to using the curves which can be quite useful. If you look at these soft clips, we can then do a low soft, which is just affecting the blacks. Just a fairly easy way of doing that. It's kind of similar to adjusting this bottom bit of the curve, but we can just do it here, low soft. And we can do a high soft as well, which is again kind of just the same as bringing this bit down. And finally, I will note that you can adjust the colors with the curve. It's not something that I do. Personally, I'd rather use color wheels to put in some sort of color grade. But if you prefer, you can edit blue, green and red curves, put in a few points, and then try and just do something like that here. But guys, I think that's a bit more complicated than using the color wheels and not so practical. So I'm just showing that in case you've used this method before for color grading and you're wondering if you could select different colored curves. And yes, you can. But for 99% of us, we can ignore that and we're just going to focus on using the color wheels.